All right, Shabbos, say good morning. My apologies for the delay. Technical issues, apparently even at 5:45 in the morning. Technical issues, Baruch Hashem. All right, Shabbos, so we're going to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's daf. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of, Baruch Hashem. New Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, Dovi and Nina Elman, in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming a bas mitzvah. May she continue to be a source of nachas to our entire family. We thank the Elman so much for that beautiful dedication. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's and Esther, and in memory of Paul's aunt Esther Pollack, Esther Bas Zecharia, Moshe Ben Zion and Judy Pacino, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of Moshe Ben Zion's mother, Leah Rachel Bas Shmuel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah, and the family in Nechama. We thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Brian and Suri Tannen, for the yahrzeit of Brian's father, Baruch Yaakov Ben Shlomo Aryeh, and an appreciation for all of the shiurim. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld, Le'iloi Nishmas Yaakov Ze'ev Ben Ruvain Halevi, Julie's grandfather, as well as in the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Ruchama Aviva Bas Sheina Chana and Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible and ongoing support. And also with that, let us begin. Today's daf, we have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chof Hey 25. Actually, a lot of great sugyas, a lot of great halacha l'maisa. We'll see exactly how much we get to. So today's daf is Chof Hey 25, and we are picking up in Miras Hashem on Chof Dalid Amud Beis 24b. So let's remember again, we were speaking about the concept, Rabbi Avo's idea, that halacha l'maisa, you only get malchus, you only get lashes for violation of an isser hana. If you go ahead, or you only get lashes for, am I okay? All right, we only get malchus ultimately again for. Tell me what you need.
Did it publish?
Yeah, I published. It might take a little bit of time to, yeah. All right, so we're also taking collections for our technology budget. If you'd like to be PayPal, Zelle, right? So the Gemara pointed out that halacha l'maisa, you only get malchus if you go ahead and you partake of the particular item kederach hana asan in a normative fashion. So if you were to, we gave the example, if you were to go ahead and take chaylev and put chaylev ultimately again on top of your mak, on top of your wound, then halacha l'maisa, you would not be in violation for the enjoyment, so to speak, or consumption of chaylev, or benefiting from chaylev, because halacha l'maisa, that is non-normative enjoyment. So along those same lines, the Gemara says as follows. Amra Abaye, so we're picking up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. Amra Abaye, hakol moldim bikloi hakerem, shalokin alein afilu shalo kederach hana asan. The Gemara says, Abaye explains that everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, we do not go ahead and you don't get malchus for benefiting from klai hakerem if you go ahead and you benefit from them shelo kederach hanasam in an abnormal way. So remember again, klai hakerem means the act of planting either grain or greens in proximity to a vineyard. So if you go ahead and you get benefit from klai hakerem shelo kederach hanasam in an abnormal fashion, you don't get malchus. My time, what's the reason? So the Gemara says, Mishum d'lok sid behu achila. Interestingly enough, because by klai hakerem, the isser is not phrased in the form of achila, in the form of consumption. So because consumption is not mentioned, therefore halacha l'maisa, if you go ahead and you benefit from klai hakerem in a non-normal or abnormal fashion, you do not get malchus. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Isi ben Yehuda says, Minayin lebasar b'chalav shu aser. So I'll say, how do we know ultimately again that basar b'chalav is aser? So if you take a look quickly at actually no, so let's go. So how do we know that basar b'chalav is aser? Ne'emar kan ki am kadosh ato v'ne'emar lahalon va'anshe kodesh tiyunli. So we'll say by basar b'chalav it says you shall not partake of it ki am kadosh ato, for you are a holy nation. And interestingly enough, by treifa it says v'ne'emar lahalon va'anshe kodesh tiyunli, and you shall be a consecrated people to me. So we'll say that's a reference to treifa. That's a reference to treifa. So remember again, the pasuk says, "Basar basal the treifa anshe kodesh teyun li, basar basal the treifa lo sochilun." Be a holy people to me, therefore don't eat a treifa animal. Ma lahalan aser. So just like a treifa is aser, ultimately again, so too basar b'chalav is aser as well. Ve'ini ela b'achila. I only know. Remember, treifa is only aser b'achila. It is not aser b'hana. B'hana minayin. How do I know ultimately again that basar b'chalav is aser b'hana as well? To which the Gemara says, Amrit kavachomer. Make a kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? Uma arla shelo ne'evda ba'avera asura ba'ana. So arla, nothing, there was no avera done in arla. I'm sorry, Bose, I meant, right. There was no avera done with arla. Remember again, arla represents the fruit of the first 3 years. So Bose, so there's no maisa avera in the creation of arla, right? Arla is just the growth of regular fruit. Yet what? Asura b'hana. Yet arla is going to be asur b'hana. Basar b'chalav shenevda ba'avera. Eino din she asur b'hana. Then basar b'chalav, ultimately what? The basar b'chalav, where halacha l'maisa again, there was an avera that was done in the creation of it. Ultimately, again, it should certainly be asur b'hana. Suppose I see you hear the Kavach Omer? If arla, there was nothing wrong done in the creation of arla. Yet arla is asur b'hana. So basar b'chalav, where there was something done in the creation of basar b'chalav, i.e. what? You mixed milk and meat together. You weren't supposed to do that. Halacha l'maisa, it certainly should be asur b'hana. To which type of chaf hey, mali arlish ken lo haisa v'shas hakosher. But here's the distinction: they're not necessarily comparable, because remember again, arla itself never had a moment in which it was permitted. Tomar bebasar b'chalav shahaisa lo shas hakosher. Ultimately, again, one should say when it comes to basar b'chalav, that halacha l'maisa, it had a shas hakosher. Suppose you hear that distinction? That arla itself was never permitted. It's not that, remember, when you plant the tree, anything that grows for those first 3 years is automatically aser. There's no point in time, ultimately, again, where that klal yakerem, where that arla is mutter. Yet ultimately, again, basar b'chalav did have a shas hakosher. What's the shas hakosher? What was the window of permissiveness when it comes to basar b'chalav? Before it was mixed together, right? When it was just basar, it was just chalav. Ultimately, again, they were both permitted. To which the Gemara says, chametz pesach yochiach. So chametz pesach is a good raya. What do you say about chametz pesach? Shahayu lo shas hakosher. But remember again, chametz had a shas hakosher. When was the shas hakosher of chametz? The whole rest of the year, right? The entire year chametz is permitted. Va'asr ba'ana. And yet when Pesach comes, it is asr ba'ana. So I will say that should be a good raya. That should be a good raya for basar b'chalav. Basar b'chalav, like chametz, had a window of permissiveness. It was permitted for a certain amount of time. But then when it becomes asr, it becomes asr ba'ana. 1 second. Malu chametz pesach shekin anush kares. Tomar b'basar b'chalav she'ena anush kares. So we'll say, but here's the problem. Remember again, the problem, of course, is the comparison is not totally good. Because after all, again, basar b'chalav, chametz on Pesach, ultimately again, which is an isser of kares, when it comes to chametz Pesach is an isser of kares. Basar b'chalav, of course, is not an isser of kares. So therefore, again, the comparison is not really good. To which the Gemara says, klal yakerem yochichu. So let's prove the following. So klal yakerem will be the raya. What's right from klal yakerem? She'eno anush kares. So first, klal yakerem ultimately again are not. There's no chi of kares by klal yakerem. Va'asr ba'ana. But yet they are asr b'hana. So we'll say, so this could go ahead and serve as a raya to basar b'chalav. Just like klal yakerem ultimately again is asr b'hana, and it's not the chi of kares. So too, again, basar b'chalav, which also is not an isser kares, should also be asr b'hana. To which the Gemara says, ve'misa. But if what you said before was correct, what are we referring to? We'll say, if you remember, we said before that halacha l'maisa, that klal yakerem, Zevi, I'm sorry, you could close that door, I'm sorry. If we go ahead and we said, like we said before, namely, that klal yakerem, you don't get malchus if you go ahead and you enjoy it, shelo kederach hana asan. Remember, that's how we started this. That because the Torah does not phrase the isra of klal yakerem as an isra achila, therefore halacha l'maisa, I don't get malchus if I enjoy it in a non-normative fashion. So if that's the case, Rabbi say, if that is true, I'm sorry, I said that just the opposite. Klaya Kerem, you do get Malkus, I'm sorry. Klaya Kerem, you do get Malkus, ultimately again, even if you enjoy it in a non-normative fashion. I'm sorry if I said that wrong before. Klaya Kerem, because the prohibition is not phrased as an Isser Achila, therefore again, one does get Malkus if one enjoys it even in a non-normative fashion. Also, remember again, this stands in contradistinction to other Isur. Remember again, Rabbi Avo said yesterday, in yesterday's daf, that halacha l'maisa, if you benefit from something that is asr, shelo kiderech hana asr, in a non-normative fashion, you are not chayiv. The example of that was, chaylev on your wound. Right? You go and you put chaylev on your wound, Rabbi Avo said you're not chayiv. Why? Because you're only chayiv if you benefit from something in a normative fashion. Now the Gemara is suggesting that klaya kerem ultimately is an exception to that rule. That klaya kerem, even if you get benefit from it in a non-normative fashion, you will still be chayiv for that. Why is that? What was the svara? The svara was because by klaya kerem, the Torah doesn't phrase it as an isra achila. It doesn't phrase it ultimately again as a prohibition of consumption. So because it just frames it as a stam prohibition, you'll be chayiv even if you benefit from it in a non-normative fashion. Now I will say, why is that important? Because remember again, the Gemara now quotes a brisa. The brisa is trying to prove that basar b'chalav has an isser hana. So we're comparing basar b'chalav to a whole bunch of stuff. To treifa, to chametz, and now we say, well, you can't compare it to chametz. Why? Because chametz has an iser kares. To which the Gemara says, well, let's compare it to klaya kerem, because klaya kerem ultimately again is an item that is prohibited and is not chayiv kares, but also has an iser hana. To which the Gemara said, but one second, if what you said before was correct, namely that by klaya kerem you get malchus, even if you don't enjoy it in a normative fashion, that's a unique aspect, ultimately, again, by klaya kerem. The Gemara says, so, v'im isa, nifroch mala klaya kerem shekin lokin alein afish loki derachana asan, v'abaye, tomar b'may tomar. So ultimately, again, what will Abaye say? Tomar b'basar b'chalav, shein lokin alav ela derachana asan. So the problem, of course, by Abaye will have to say is that by basar b'chalav, halacha l'maisa, again, you only get malchus derachana asan. Ater b'basar b'chalav achilak sivavei. But I will say, but one second, maybe basar b'chalav is another exception to this rule. Because I will say, remember again, by basar b'chalav, the Torah also does not go ahead and put forward the lav with lashon achila. Right? The Torah never says you can't eat basar b'chalav. Rather, what does the Torah say? What does the Torah say? Lo sevashel gedi b'chaliv imo. Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. See, interestingly enough, I will say, what are you going to say? That maybe you want to suggest that klaya kerem has a unique aspect in that you get malchus afilu shelo kederachana asa. Well, one second, basar b'chalav, like klaya kerem, does not have its prohibition phrased in bederach achila, right? All it says is lo seva shel gedi bechalivimo. So is the isser by basar b'chalav framed as an isser achila? V'idach the kamosiv la. V'idach the kamosiv la savar lahachi kagara min nevela. And the other opinion will say no. This is the entire reason that basar b'chalav was run out from nevela. Man nevela derech hana asa af basar b'chalav derech hana asa. That while it's true that basar b'chalav does not have its prohibition framed or phrased as an Isser Achila, this is the reason ultimately, again, it is learned out from Nevela. Just like Nevela, you are only Chayiv ultimately, again, for Derech Hana Asa. So to Basar b'chalav, you will only be Chayiv Derech Hana Asa. Abaye will say, Lahachi lo kasev achila begufo, lomar shalokin alav afilu shaloki derech hana asa. And Abaye will say, no, the entire reason why the Torah does not go ahead and phrase the Isser Basar b'chalav as an Isser Achila is why? To teach you that halacha l'maisa, you are chayiv for Basar b'chalav afilu shelo kederech hana asa. even if you benefit from it in some abnormal way, halacha l'maisa, you will still be chayiv for violation of basar b'chalav. So we'll say, a very interesting discussion here. So we'll say, therefore, just to kind of keep focused, the major part of our sukkah, Rabbi say, is Rabbi Avo's statement that halacha l'maisa, you are only chayiv ultimately again for isurim if you benefit from them kiderach hana asan. If you benefit from them in what we call a normative fashion. That's why, again, the case of chaylev is the paradigmatic case. If you go and you place chaylev on your wound, although you are technically benefiting from chaylev, because that is not the normal way to benefit, therefore halacha l'maisa, you will not be chayiv. All the Gemara now brings up is, by the way, there may be exceptions to that rule. What type of exceptions to that rule? Well, when the Torah prohibits something and doesn't prohibit it b'lashon achila, that you can't eat something. So remember, again, let's take one more step back. What we've also established is that sometimes when the Torah says you can't eat something, eating also includes what? Hana. Right? You're supposed to remember again, that's the machlokes Rabbi Avo and Chizkiah, which we still have to resolve. Ultimately, again, but halacha l'maisa, so the Gemara is saying, normally when we say achila could also mean hana, right? But again, even when there's an isser hana means you can't get normative benefit. But anytime you get non-normative benefit, it could very well be that halacha l'maisa, you're not going to be chayv for that. Which I will say, the logic behind that is, when the Torah prohibits something, it prohibits it in a normative framework. So if you're going to get benefit, but it's not normative benefit, then halacha l'maisa, again, you're not going to be chayv for that. Except when, kind of coming full circle, except when the Torah frames the prohibition in a way that doesn't use a lashon of achila. If the Torah frames a prohibition and doesn't use lashon achila, it's quite possible that the Torah is coming to tell you you're going to be chayiv for consumption, for hana, and even for what? Non-normative hana. So we have two examples of where the Torah frames a prohibition and doesn't use lashon of achila. So if we have klaya kerem and basar b'chalav. So we'll say klaya kerem will have to basar b'chalav. We know, by the way, that you are chayiv for non-normative hana. Right? How do we know that? Now basar b'chalav, the truth is a little bit of an outlier. Because basar b'chalav, you even chayiv for what? Even just for the act of making it. Right, so remember again, so basar b'chalav, the Torah doesn't phrase it as a lashon achila, as an isra achila, so you be chayiv even for non-normative benefits. But we're not finished. For lifroch, why don't you go ahead and ask on that kal v'chomer? Moy klaya kerem shekein lo haisa lo shas hakosher. Klaya kerem itself never had a time that it was permitted. Also remember again, klaya kerem is asr from the beginning. That's different than basar b'chalav. Basar b'chalav is not asr from the beginning. When it was just basar, when it was just chalav, they were both mutter. Right? Also remember again, that is the greatest chiddush of basar b'chalav. Like klaya kerem. Normally when we have something prohibited, the etzem item, meaning the item itself, is prohibited. Basar b'chalav is unique because you're taking two permitted items and you are bringing them together to create something prohibited. The truth is, that is the halacha with many types of, same thing with shatnez, same thing with klaya kerem. Items which are independently permitted, but yet somehow the mixture of two permitted items creates a prohibited result. So the Gemara says, why don't you ask on the kal v'chomer v'lifroch? By klaya kerem, ultimately again, there was no permitted time. Amrav Adabar will say this incredible. Zosam eres klaya kerem ikarin ne'esarim hoil v'haisa lahem shas hakosher kodim hashrasha. So we'll say maybe it's possible to say that klaya kerem are permitted when you first plant them, because maybe halacha l'maisa klaya kerem only becomes prohibited when the item itself takes root. See, remember again, let's illustrate a very simple case of klaya kerem. I have a vineyard, and then what do? I bring in some stalks of grain. I bring in a grain patch, and I go ahead and I plant stalks of grain in close proximity to my vineyard. So the interesting shot that's going to come up now is, when does that grain become prohibited? At what point in time? See, is it the moment that you plant it in the ground? Or the Gemara suggesting maybe halacha l'maisa, the grain is permitted until it takes root. It's only once it takes root, hashrasha, ultimately, again, that makes it us. The Gemara said, 1 second. Maser Rav Shmaya. Rav Shmaya brought up an interesting case. Hama'avir atzitz nakov bekerem. Well, the sugi of atzitz nakov has to appear at least once in every mesechta. Right? It's incredible. It's the perforated path. It's everywhere. So remember again, the whole chap with the atzitz nakov is what? Is that because it's perforated, therefore what? The halacha says it could draw nutrients from the ground. That it's an interesting idea. That because it's perforated on the bottom, it's as if somehow it is attached to the ground. So listen to this fascinating case. You are bringing an atzitz nakov in a keren. So we'll say, now watch this case. So imagine the following situation. I have a perforated pot, and I have grain planted in it. And what am I doing? I'm taking it through, I'm walking it through a vineyard. Get ready for this. What's the halacha? Im hosif masayim, if it grew at least 1/200th, aser. Ultimately, again, the grain will be aser. However, hosif in, lo hosif lo. So what do you see from there? So you see from here that when does klei hakara become aser? When does it become aser? When? If there's additional growth. So it's not when the item takes root. It's ultimately, again, so it's not when you plant it, and it's not when it takes root. It's when there is additional growth. So almost like, this is a yesodistic shaila. At what point in time am I chayer for klei hakara? We'll say this means two things. Number one, when do I violate the isra? We'll say, why else is this important? Let's say I plant grain in my vineyard. And then you know what? I become a Baal Tshuva. We all have to become Baal Tshuva. I become Baal Tshuva. I say, I didn't have it. I want to reverse it. I want to yank the grain out of the ground. So we'll say, what's the shaila? Does yanking the grain out of the ground do anything or not? Well, now we have three possibilities. When does klei hakara? When do I violate? It's very exciting. When do I violate that? Do I violate it when I plant it? Do I violate it when it takes root? Or do I violate it when? Possibility number three, when there's additional growth. Now, a minimal amount of growth. 1/200th of growth, but some minimal amount of growth. So which one is it? And we seem to have contradictory sources. Rabbi said, listen to this. Trei kroi ksivi. The truth is, there are two psukim written by klei hakerem. Ksiv hazara. So one pasuk says, ultimately again, hazera. One pasuk says, ultimately again, when you plant it. Uksiv hamalea. Both say malea means growth. So which one is it? Is the Isra of klei hakara when you plant it or when it grows? Hakei said, listen to this. Zurua me'ikara bahashrasha. Zorua uba hosif. Zorua uba hosif in the hosif lo. So listen to this. I'm going to read Rashi and then I'm going to show you the Rambam to give a little bit more clarity. Look at Rashi. Zorua me'ikara, Rashi says. It's the first wide line in Rashi. Bekerem bahashrasha kidichsev azera. Mash mishaf azriya ne'aseres miu kodim hashrasha kiman deman chabekaz. Well, listen to this. If the item that we're talking about, the first time it's being planted, ultimately again is in the vineyard, then halacha l'maisa, klei hakara becomes aser as soon as the item takes root. So, for example, if you're planting grain for the first time in the vineyard, then halacha l'maisa, klei hakara is violated when the item actually takes root. However, zarua uba. What's the case of zarua uba? Rashi says, kodim lachein. So we'll say, but if he has something planted originally beforehand somewhere else. So we'll say, what's that case of an item planted originally somewhere before and somewhere else? That's the case, let's say, of the atzitz nakov. But if you have grain that is already planted somewhere, and now it's being transported ultimately again into the vineyard, then when do you violate klei hakara? When? Only when there is an additional 200th of growth. So we'll say, let me read this to you in the Rambam, because the Rambam's lashon is actually great. The Rambam writes, that's Rambam Shulchan Aruch, because the halachos of klei hakara are in Yeridea. So this is in Siman Reish Tzadik Vav Sif Tes. Me'ima saitvua o yerek miskachim. So Shulchan Aruch says, halacha l'maisa, when does klei hakara become aser? At what point in time have you transgressed? So the Shulchan Aruch says, Mishi Yishreshu. So we'll say, if you are planting something for the first time in the vineyard, klei hakara is transgressed, ultimately again when the item, whether it's grain or whether it's greens, take root. However, listen to this, that's the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Tes. Shulchan Aruch in Sif Yuzayin says as follows, Aser lavor ba'atzitz nakuf shezarua bo yerek b'soch hakerem. You are not, listen to this, you're not permitted to carry a perforated flower pot, through your vineyard. Let me say differently. You're not permitted to take a perforated pot that has grain or greens planted inside of it and walk it across the vineyard. And if halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you left it in the vineyard long enough for it to grow 1/200th, ultimately again it is aser. So we'll say, what's the chilik in the two cases? In case number one, you're planting something, the item is not planted anywhere, right? The grain or the greens are not planted anywhere. You're now planting them in the vineyard. When you plant an item in the vineyard, it only becomes asra as klaya kerem when the item takes root. In case number two, the item is already planted somewhere. Where is it planted in case number two? In the atzitznakov, in the perforated pot. Halacha l'maisa, when does that become asra as klaya kerem? When it adds on 1/200th. So I said, they're just you should know that is halacha l'maisa by klaya kerem. Quite incredible. So I'll say that closed out. Now, of course, we do paskin like the statement of Rabbi Avo, namely that halacha l'maisa, you do only get malchus for isurim if you benefit from them in a normative fashion. That is indeed the way we paskin halacha l'maisa. And again, that's in a general sense. However, there are two exceptions to this rule, as the Gemara says. So in general, for example, say for taking the Gemara's case, if you were to take a piece of chaylev and put it on your wound, would you be chayav for that? No. Why? Benefiting in a non-normative fashion. There are two, and therefore they will say that is the general rule. So we'll say, by the way, this goes for everything. If you were to take a piece of chazer and just eat it raw, rip it off the chazer and eat it, would you be chayav for that? No. Why? Ultimately, again, non-normative consumption. Non-normative anayin chayav. The only two exceptions to this rule, amazingly enough, are, number one, right? Milk and meat, basar b'chalav, and klaya kerem. Why Rabbi say? Because those two isurim ultimately again are not phrased b'lashon achila. So because Rabbi say there's two things happening over here. There was number one, the assumption like Rabbi Avo said that anytime the Torah says an isra achila also includes isra hana. Although again, I owe you the Rambam on that's what you're going to get to. All right, so that's Aleph and Beis. That's Aleph and Beis. So whenever there's an Isra Achila, also includes Isra Hana. But Isra Hana only is transgressed when you get normative benefit. The only exceptions to this rule will be when a prohibition is not phrased as an Isra Achila. When it's not phrased as an Isra Achila, it's a more expansive lav, which says that you're in violation of it, even if you benefit or you enjoy it in a non-normative fashion. One or two examples of Isurim not phrased as Zirachila, again, Basar B'chalav and Klaya Kerem. Both say halachas, very quick halachas of Klaya Kerem. When do you transgress the prohibition of planting forbidden substances in a vineyard? What's the answer? It depends. What does it depend on? Is the item already planted or not? If the greens or grains are already planted, like for example, in the case of the atzitznakov, where they're planted somewhere, and now you're bringing them through the vineyard, when do you transgress? 1/200th of growth. Excellent. However, if you are planting the greens or the grains, mamish, in the kerem itself, then Allah l'maisa, when do you transgress? Ultimately, again, as soon as they take root. Good. We'll say beautiful. Incredible. It's going to be a good day. It's mamish. It's 6:16, and look at what we've gotten already. Well, so let's go weiter. I'm going to say incredible sugya. Incredible sugya. I'm Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yochanan. Bakom misrapin chutz me'atzi ashera. Here we go. Both say you are allowed to use anything that is aser for medicinal purposes, with the exception of the branches of an ashera tree. Now, both say, remember again. Ashera is a tree used for avodah zarah. Saloch l'maisa, what the Gemara is saying is you can go ahead and get benefit. You can go ahead and essentially heal yourself with any prohibited item other than Atzei Ashera. Hechi dami. So one second. Let's analyze what exactly is the case over here. So the Gemara says, one second. If I'm in mortal danger, then it should be permitted to go ahead and use even avodah zarah. And if I'm not in mortal danger, then why should I be able to use any isser? By the way, you hear what's happening over here? This is a major shayla. A person is ill. The Gemara just said you could use anything that's also for medicinal purposes to heal yourself except Atzei Ashera. So what type of illness are we talking about? To which the Gemara says, I'm sorry, L'olam dika sakana. No, what are we talking about? We'll say it's a case of sakana. You're in mortal danger. Mortal danger. So Allah will say a person is in mortal danger. Of course, you're allowed to transgress anything and everything when in mortal danger. So you need chaylev to get better. You need tarfus to get better. You need klaya kerem to get better. Absolutely take whatever you need, with one exception. Both say, what can't you use even in a case of mortal danger? Avodah zara. Avodah zara you can't use. This time, listen to this incredible Gemara. This time, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Im ne'emar b'chol nafshecha, lama ne'emar b'chol mo'odecha. Rabbi say in Kriya Shema, if the Torah says, v'yahavtas Hashem Elokecha, the Torah says, I have to love Hashem. And what does this have to love Hashem with? I have to love Hashem with all of my heart. With b'chol levavcha, with all of my heart, b'chol nafshecha, with all of my soul, b'chol mo'odecha, with all of my means. To which the Gemara says, Im ne'emar b'chol nafshecha, if it says I have to love God with all of my soul, lama ne'emar b'chol mo'odecha, then why does it say I have to love God with all of my money? But say, obviously, with all of my soul means the entirety of my life. So I have to love God with the entirety of my life. Then why does I have to love God with all of my money? And ultimately, again, if it says with all of my money, lama ne'emar b'chol nafshecha, then ultimately, again, why does it say with all of my heart? So we'll say, again, they seem to be redundant. No, well, not really redundant. What it's saying is like this, that halacha l'maaseh, if you tell me I have to love God with all of my money, then how can you say I have to love God with all of my heart? And if you tell me that I have to love God with all of my heart, right, which means like all of my life, then obviously, which means I have to give my life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then ultimately, why does it have to say I have to love God with all of my money? In other words, if you tell me I have to give my life to the Ribono Shalom, then of course I have to give my money. And if you tell me I have to give my money, then I'm not sure exactly how to understand that I have to give my life. Here we go. Listen to this profound idea. Im yesh adam shegufo chaviv alav mimamono, lekach ne'emar b'chol nafshecha. V'yesh adam shemamonu chaviv alav migufo, lekach ne'emar b'chol ma'odecha. Because we'll say there are different kinds of people in this world. Some people love life more than they love money. And some people love money more than they love life. And some people love physical life more than they love spiritual life. And some people love spiritual life more than they love physical life. Different people love different things. So what is Ribono Shalom telling us? No matter what you love in life, I want you to love me more. No matter what you love in life, I want you to love me more. V'yahavtas Hashem Elokecha, I have to love the Ribono Shel Olam, b'chol nafshecha, whether you value physical life most, b'chol levavcha, with all of your heart, whether you value physical life most, b'chol nafshecha, spiritual life most, b'chol ma'odecha, monetary life most, whatever you value most in life, whatever is most important to you, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to love me more. So we'll say, now watch this. So what does that have to do with Avodah Zarah? So we'll say, so understand the flow. It's very, very, very exciting. So we'll say, understand the flow here. So what are we saying? So the Gemara says, you could achieve medicinal healing through anything except Avodah Zarah. Anything that's other except Avodah Zarah. Why? Because the Torah says, you have to Hashem Elokecha, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'odecha. Then I will say, if you look at Rashi says something amazing. Lama ne'emar b'chol ma'odecha. Last Rashi, Yomar ha'chaviv mishnei, v'day mefarish lefi shepamim shezeh chaviv, upamim shezeh chaviv, lekach chutzechu shneim, lomar ahavas baracha yosem min ha'chaviv alecha, v'amisrape ba'atzi ha'sheira, nira kimodelo. I will say, if you achieve medicinal healing through Atzi Hashem, through Avodah Zarah, it makes it look like you love Avodah Zarah more than you love the Ribono Shel Olam. And therefore, again, the pasuk tells me, V'yahavtas Hashem Elokecha means I can't do anything that makes it look like I love anything more than the Ribono Shel Olam. The act of healing myself with Avodah Zarah ascribes an importance to Avodah Zarah above HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that I can't do. Therefore, the Gemara says, because I have an obligation to love the Ribono Shel Olam, I can't use Avodah Zarah to heal myself, even if I'm in the midst of mortal danger. Then I will say, I want to point out, just the hour is late, so I don't have time to do it, but I'm just going to do it very quickly. So I will say, Tosas here, last Tosas on the Daf, says something absolutely amazing. Tosas says, Nira Lari, last top bottom Tosas, the Mairi kegon she'ein yochol l'srapib mishar eitzim ela bazeh, kegon al yedei shedim o shum davar. Tosas here will say, the recall something amazing. The Ri says, when can't you use Avodah Zarah for refuah? The Ri understands it's when you're somehow tapping in to the spiritual powers of the Avodah Zarah. Like it's assumed that there's some type of presence or aura about this that's used for healing. But Tosa says, for example, if you need to make a bandage out of the bark, and it just happens to be the only bark that's available is Asherah bark, but you would have just as soon used an oak tree or a different kind of tree. It doesn't mean you don't care. You just need bark. Tosa says that's mutter. This is going to be the subject of machlokes that we're going to get into. Just want to point out, so the reason understanding the Gemara of when it says Bakom Misrapin Chutz Me'asi Asherah, that's when you are somehow tapping into the spiritual qualities of the Asherah. That's when it looks like you're being molded to the Avodah Zarah. But if you're just using the bark of the tree, and it just happens to be the only tree available right now is an Asherah tree, then Allah Lamaisa, that's going to be permitted. We're going to see those who are going to both say Vaiter. Kiyasar Abin Amram Yochanan, Bakom Misrapin. You can heal yourself with anything that's aser. Chutz mi'avodah zarah, gilui arayos, u'shvichus dam. Rabbi say, except if your healing requires you to violate any of the three cardinal averos of avodah zarah, idolatry, immorality, or murder. So we'll say, so remember again, just to illustrate this, how do you go ahead and heal yourself with murder? What does that mean? So Rashi points out a very simple case. Kigon amrulo harog yisol chaver chavim lafti hareg. Let's say again, a nachri comes over to you and he says, listen, here's the deal. Either you kill Reuven or I'll kill you. You'll kill Reuven or I'll kill you. So we'll say, so in that situation, I'm pretty ill, right? I'm in a pretty precarious situation. So the only way for me to quote unquote heal myself is to kill another person. So the Gemara says you can't heal yourself like that. Same idea with gilui arayos, immorality. The person says, engage in this act of immorality or I'll kill you. So we'll say, remember, if someone says I'm going to kill me, that's like being it's being halachically ill. Right? I'm in a precarious situation. So halacha l'maisa, I am permitted to heal myself with any prohibited substance, or even that I can commit any avera I need to in order to heal myself, with the exception of the three cardinal averas. Avodah zarah, idolatry, gilui arayos, immorality, shvichus dam, and murder. So the Gemara says avodah zarah hada amrans. Avodah zarah we just said before. We just proved that before. That's based on the Avtos Shnon Kecho. Gilui arayos, shvichus dam. We'll say, how do I know that I can't quote unquote heal myself with immorality or murder? Desanya Rabbi Omer ki ka'asher yakum ish areu uretzachol nefesh kein adavar hazeh. So we'll say, give you a little bit of context. The pasuk over here is talking about nara hame'urasa. Right, a girl who is betrothed to be married, which means again, Abba says she has done kiddushin with a man, so she's received an item of value, affected kiddushin, and then the Torah is describing a situation over here where halacha l'maisa, she's raped by someone. So she's raped by someone. So Torah says, ki kasher yakum ish arei retzachol nefesh. The Torah compares. Now, interestingly enough, so the pasuk says, obviously, the girl is not held, the Nara is not held accountable for what occurred because she was violated, she was raped. So the Gemara says, because the Torah compares this situation, what this man has done to this woman is like someone who stands ready to murder another person. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Why does the Torah compare rape to murder? So the Gemara says, or I should say, why does the Torah compare the rapist to a murderer, or to an attempted murderer? The Torah is comparing a murderer, a rotzeach, to nara murasa, meaning what? Ma nara murasa nitin lahatzila benafsho. The Bible says, listen to this. If you see a man attempting to rape a woman, you are permitted to save her even, let me say this, finish the sentence. You are permitted to save her even if the only way of doing so is by killing the attempted rapist. So halacha l'maisa, if you see a man ready to violate the woman, that is considered to be sakanas nafashas, that is tent, right? And therefore, again, if the only way to stop him is to kill him, then halacha l'maisa, you are permitted to do so. Af rotzeach, nitan la'asila benafsho. Ultimately, again, what I will say, halacha l'maisa, the rotzeach is the same thing, right? The fact that the Torah compares nara musra to rotzeach, I know that halacha l'maisa, if I see Reuven running after Shimon, and Reuven is about to kill Shimon, what am I allowed to do? I'm allowed to kill Reuven to stop him from killing Shimon. So too, I see a man about to rape a woman, halacha l'maisa, I could kill him in order to stop the rape. V'nara murasa rotzeach. We also learn something out from nara. We also learn out a halacha of nara hamurasa from rotzeach. How so? Ma rotzeach yiharig v'yavar. They both say just like rotzeach is yiharig v'yavar, which means if someone says to me, "Kill Reuven or I'll kill you," I have no right to take Reuven's life in order to save my own. It's yiharig v'yavar. I have to allow myself to be killed rather than to transgress. Af nara hamurasa. teharig va'yavra. We'll say, so to nara murasa is also yaharig va'yavra. Now, what does it mean nara murasa yaharig va'yavra? We'll say, what's nara murasa? That's gilei arayos. Remember again, a nara murasa is a married woman, so relations with her is immorality. So the comparison between Rotzech and nara murasa teaches me two things. Number one, it teaches me the same way that I could kill Ruvain, who's trying to kill Shimon, I could kill Ruvain, who's trying to rape a Jewish woman, right? He's trying to rape Sarah. I'm allowed to do that. Not only that, the Gemara says the limit also goes the other way. Just like I have to sooner give up my life rather than kill someone else, so too I have to give up my life rather than quote unquote rape a woman. What does that mean? I have to give up my life rather than engage in an act of immorality. Shabbos say, so from here we see that halacha l'maisa, the three cardinal averos of avodah zarah, gilei arayos, shvichos damim are all yeharig va'al ya'avar. I have to sooner give my life than to transgress them. That stands in contradistinction with every other halacha in the Torah. Every other halacha will say the halacha is ya'avor va'al yeharik. You do. Somebody tells me, eat chazu, I'm going to kill you. Say pass the ketchup, right? That's all. I will say, hey. So again, I eat. I mean, don't pass the ketchup, right? But again, I transgress. I transgress. Where shatners, I'm going to kill you. I transgress. Three averos where I must give up my life rather than transgress. So the Gemara says, "Shvichos damim gufei minalan." We'll say so. But where do I know murder itself? In other words, we'll say, where do I know that halacha l'maisa, murder itself, I have to sooner give up my life? In other words, we'll say, one could have made the cogent argument that this, right, chayecha kodmin, my life comes first. So therefore, from where do I know that I can't take Ruvain's life in order to save my own? Svarahu. This is incredible. It's a svara. Ki Yahuda asla kamei de Rava, because it was once a guy who came before Rava. Amrlei, Mari dorai Amrli, zilkatle leplanye. Shabbos say this was a real case. A man came before Rava, and he said to Rava, the tyrannical ruler of my city, right? Mari Dorai, the ruler of my city, came to me, and he said, if I don't kill Ruvain, he's going to kill me. Amrlei, and Rava said to him, Liktalach velo siktal. You have to give your life, and you cannot kill Ruvain. After all, my chazis didama didach sumak tfei. Who says your blood is any redder? Dilma dama dahu gavra sumak tfei. Maybe the blood of your fellow is redder than yours. Which Rabbi says is another way of saying that in the realm of human life, who is to say that one life is more important, right? So Rabbi was saying to this man, you want to take Ruvain's life in order to save yours. Who says your life is any more important than him? Then Rabbi said, but you can make, so what's the counter argument to that? So who says that Ruvain's life is any more important than mine? So Rabbi says, so you're right. It's a good kasha. And therefore the only way to resolve it is how? Shevi al tasa. Shevi al tasa. So you're right. That's exactly the point. I don't know whose life is more important. How do you gauge whose life is more important? My life, his life. I'm a this, you're a that. You're this old, I'm that old. Who knows? So because we have no way of gauging the quote-unquote importance of life, therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, again, shevi al tasa, we do not go ahead and save one life at the expense of another. So we'll have to stop over here. Again, I will say, this sugya goes on. I just want to point out, I owe you, just remind me, here's what I owe you. I owe you a number of things. Number one, I owe you the vart of Lakelef Tashlichun also. Actually, one of our listeners from Eretz Yisrael emailed me and told me that I never gave the vart. I owe you Lakelef Tashlichun also. That's Aleph, right? Beis. We'll say, just hold on just for a second. Right? Number two, I owe you the halacha l'maisa in the machlokes, ultimately again between Chizkiah and Rabbi Avo. That is incredibly important. And now halacha l'maisa again, I owe you also top tostos on Chaf Hey Amar Beis. We'll say, feel free to look at it tonight by the Chanukah Licht. This tostos is incredibly important because Rabbi say we just established that Gilei Arayos ultimately again is Yeharig Va'al Yavar. Right, that you have to sooner give your life rather than transgress. All right, we'll say, just give me 1 second. Stop the conversation just for a second. I'll say, remember, this is very important. I want to give you this amount of malkum. We just said that halacha l'maisa gilei arayos is yeharig val yavar. I want to just point out, I'm going to give you the Rashi Prakim on this because it's late already, that Tosas brings out something very important. That's only when you are an active participant in the gilei arayos. But if halacha l'maisa something is being done to you, which of course is often the case, which could be in the case, of course, by a woman, then halacha lamaisa gila rayos may not be a harig val yavar. It's a complicated sugya. It's the sugya of Esther Amalka, the sugya of Karka Olam. That's the top tosis over here. Just Menachem, you're going to keep the list of things. I'm appointing you as the sheer list keeper. Right? And Amir Hashem will get through all of these things in the coming days. Shkaya Chavosai.